Welcome to the Yoga Life podcast. Hello and welcome. My name is Kevin. This is episode 110 of the Yoga Life podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Yoga with Me online. You can practice yoga anytime, any place, as long as you've got an internet connection with me via my website. What you get is weekly updates, weekly new classes, new audio meditations, 60-minute long. At the moment, we've got about 40 classes up there and about 15 audio meditations. For €19 a month, you can access this on your mobile, on your laptop, and every video is done to the highest quality, like this, if you're watching this on video. So, go along to Kevin Boyle Yoga, follow the prompts, you'll get a little pop-up and you can get a 3 weeks trial. Try it out. If you like it, stick with it. Any questions about that, let me know. That's enough flogging stuff. Today I have with me an old friend, Mr. Brian Malone. Brian's actually been on the podcast twice before. He was on episode 6 and 60, I think. Like me, Brian is a teacher of yoga. He's also a yoga teacher trainer. So I haven't seen Brian for a while. We were supposed to do a podcast as lockdown was happening, but then I kind of went into freak out mode and social distanced myself and isolated myself from everyone. And so this podcast is long overdue. Looking forward to speaking with Brian. It has been a while. He's always got a very level, balanced opinion, and it'd be good to catch up. So without further ado, here is Brian Malone.
Yeah, it's nice when I got this phone. I don't really use my phone for anything other than taking pictures, Instagram and WhatsApp, and so I just started taking pictures of people with the portrait mode just because the camera was like class. But it became actually a really nice way of making me realize all the really nice people I spend like time with. You know what I mean? Because I was like, oh, I'm going to take like your portrait. And then like looking back and I was like, wow, that's like, I have loads of really nice people in my life. It's really cool.
Because I suppose we'll start now, shall we? Yeah. Photography is an interesting one because I do all my own photographs. I just do like self-timer. And I use, actually, if someone asked me the other day, I use a 50, which is actually over there, it's a 50mm lens, which is a different camera. And I started doing these like teacher trainings where I talk about branding, and sometimes that word can sound a little bit cold, a bit corporate, can't it?
Calculated, maybe.
Calculated, yeah, like almost like manipulative.
Yeah.
But the way I try to explain it is that it's like a familiarity. You know, if people are familiar with you, you have a brand, or at least you're recognizable. And I think that's why, especially for yoga teachers, anyone who's building a personal brand, even if you're not doing it consciously, when you look at a portrait of someone, when it's taken with a really good camera, and without getting too technical, when you have like a nice aperture, and this aperture is when you have, I could be wrong here, I'm pretty sure.
What is aperture?
Okay.
I have an aperture, like, what do you call it, like an aperture mode on my, but I've no idea what it does.
Aperture is, and Neil would know more than I would, but is the depth of field. So if I look at, the way I look at you, you're clear to me now because I'm focused on you, but everything in the back is blurry. And most regular cameras, especially on a phone, don't differentiate between that. But when you have a nice aperture or like a blurry background, essentially, it draws your eye to the person. And when I seen you started taking photographs like this, I was like, wow, these are like the book I have in there, the Humans of New York, that book. To look at someone in a portrait and to see it the way your eye would see it, there's something, it's so personal, isn't it? Because I said to myself, bro, I was like, right, I'm going to start taking more pictures of just me, like not me trying to do a yoga pose. And I remember you said to me once that you feel a bit funny about photographs.
Yeah, I've never been. I don't know if I'd say that I'm not like photogenic, but I'm not comfortable getting my picture taken. If it's just like, but that's like I get it from like my dad's side of the family. Like my two sisters, my mom have like the most beautiful smiles, like amazing getting their picture taken. Me, my dad, and my nanny. If someone goes to take a picture, like, oh, smile, all we do is just like lift our eyebrows, like lean in a little bit. Like, I don't know what that is. I don't know. I've just never like. I feel like I missed a day at school or something when people were taught how to get their picture taken. Yeah. And yeah, it's like a little bit like a Ricky Bobby kind of thing of like, just don't know what to do with my hands. So like, but I'm trying to get a little bit more comfortable with it for sure, because it's really nice to have your picture taken. You know what I mean? And like you're saying, like nice pictures of people, particularly nice portraits and stuff like that. There's something so. Yeah, they're just beautiful. People are so interesting looking, you know what I mean? And I think when that gets captured well, like when I was taking even not like the portraits that I'm taking of people or anything like spectacular or anything, but you know, like taking pictures of like some of my friends and stuff, and then looking at it like, wow, he really looks like that. You know what I mean? Like just little things you don't really notice in the moment or something.
And also the person taking the picture affects how the subject comes across,
for sure,
because you're their friend, you know them, it's kind of a casual setting. And this is something that I never considered before, but if you decide to up your photography game and you're a yoga teacher, you can choose a photographer to work with, and it makes a big difference. The skill level could be great and that's fine, but it's the chemistry you have with the person. If you can have a bit of fun with them, and if they know you as well in your character, then you're going to feel just more natural around them. Sometimes, like, I've had situations where, you know, I'm holding a yoga pose for a couple of minutes and the photographer's like, okay, now just turn the hand this way, and by the time the pose is taken, I look kind of annoyed, you know. I was looking back on my Instagram photos, like, I look like a bit of an arse, because like I'm kind of got a real serious expression on my face, like I take myself really seriously. But that's why now, say with Rach as well, we'll just have the camera out and sometimes just take a picture just in the moment. And I actually did in this teacher training workshop, the branding one, I had a screenshot of my phone, and it was my most liked Instagram pictures. And the top 10, there was no yoga pose. The top 3, Rachel was in them. So maybe she's the attraction. But so what does that say about our psychology in terms of what we like?
I don't know. But it's interesting with I've recently become a little bit more friendly with, I think you know him as well, like, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right here though, Yeri. Like,
oh yeah,
handstand genius. And he's like the sweetest, most like lovely, generous, caring dude. But before I met him, I was like really intimidated by him, because in all of like his pictures and stuff, he just looks really intense. Yeah. He just looks like a really intense dude who can do like these ridiculous handstand things. And I remember we went to a handstand training with like Yuval. I can't remember his second name actually. Yuval on hands. Like one of
that sounds very familiar. Was that in Ireland?
Yeah, at the Movement Studio. And I think Yuval Avalon could be his second name, or maybe he lives in a place called Avalon. But he's one of like the really high, like top handstand coaches out there. Yeah, and he's kind of intense, but like a lot of like the handstand dudes are a little bit intense, because it's an intense thing to like train that much. And so Jerry was there, and I just remember being like, like. But he's the nicest dude. Like, he's the nicest dude, like, nicest guy.
I suppose because you've got to focus a lot, haven't you? What was Miguel like? You were over in Australia,
yeah, Miguel, I do some one-on-one stuff with him now. He's kind of like my coach. He's awesome, though. He's such a sweet dude as well. Yeah. Really friendly, really... but at the same time, he's intense, because it's definitely what it's not handstand practice, it's handstand training. And the very high level dudes, that's what it is, it's training.
What's the difference?
Well, I feel in practice is more sort of like scope for maybe a little bit informal. It's more kind of like exploratory, maybe a little bit more personal, maybe. Whereas this handstand training is like regimented. You know what I mean? Like I've got a handstand program off now, and it's like 3 rounds of this, 90 seconds rest in between, 4 rounds of this, 90 seconds rest in between. And it's not that it's like, it's disciplined for sure. It's not like military, you know what I mean? And I think there's like, but it's a lot less kind of like, oh, do this and see how it feels. And then, oh, maybe try this if that feels better. It's like, no, do this. And if you do this, you'll get better.
I had the same experience with Devin Kelly, actually, who mentioned Miguel. He thought, this is unedited. I'm just going to fix this camera. 1 sec.
Yeah, go dude.
Yeah, with Devin
But you are going to edit this, or you're not going to edit this?
Not going to edit, no. We're in Bali. So, I don't edit these at all. Never edit, no. Once, actually, I left Jenny Keane on her own here while I went to the toilet. Oh, wow. But she was just chatting away. Oh, okay. I don't do that with you, don't I? But,
right, yeah. Who knows what way that conversation could have gone.
Yeah, but with Devin, so yeah, he mentioned Miguel as well. But one thing he said, and this is about repetition, and also parameters. So if you want to get good at a skill, you need to have the parameters set, like what are you trying to achieve, and then to do it over and over again. And then once you get good at that, how are you going to, say, strength training, progressively overload? And I'm sure with any skill training, how are you going to make it more complex and factor in different variables? And what I've kind of struggled with lately is, in my yoga teaching, sometimes it feels like I'm teaching a skill as opposed to a yoga class. So I started doing a lot of hip mobility stuff lately, and it requires being controlled and progressive overload, definitely, but also repetition. And it's not very flowy, right? So it's made me kind of feel like, because a part of me wants to please people as well. And you know when you finish a class and people leave and no one says thank you, like, you think, oh, did no one enjoy that? And then one person says thank you, like, yes. But I think that I want to teach what I do myself, as opposed to just always the same thing that try and please the masses. Have you experienced that at all?
Yeah, I've kind of I probably went through a bit of a shift in how I approach stuff like that over the last like year or so, because like probably similar to you, like personally in my own practice, I found like mobility stuff so beneficial. In my own personal practice, I would very rarely on my own, like say, go through like a flow or whatever, you know what I mean? Or practice a Vinyasa flow class, because for me personally, where I was at physically, what I wanted to sort of achieve, let's say, mobility was what I was getting benefits from, like just controlling the movement of my joints, like a really beneficial thing. And for a while, that's what I was teaching, still within like the context of like a yoga practice, but a lot of mobility stuff. And mobility stuff is not that I feel like a yoga practice has to be exciting, but mobility stuff, unless you're really into it, is not particularly exciting. You know what I mean? Like just like rotating your arm loads of times. But again, I just personally found it like so beneficial that I was like, that's, you know, I don't ever teach sun salutations, because I think for a lot of people, sun salutations aren't particularly beneficial. Kind of like one of my teachers, Justin Wolfer, where he kind of talks about is like, sun salutations requires exceptional scapular control to do it like really, really well. And a lot of people don't have that. So I've like, don't really teach them a huge amount. But then what I started to drift away from, or when I started to kind of drift away from that again, was because what I started to realize was that a lot of people aren't necessarily coming to a yoga practice to learn how to move better. You know what I mean? A lot of people aren't coming to a yoga class to learn how to rotate their shoulders. For a lot of people, those benefits are almost like byproducts. And what a lot of people are coming from is if they've worked a busy day, they just want to move a little bit, they want to create a bit of space, and then they want to like relax at the end. So I now not prefer, but I know, and I like working with people one-on-one now. Because I think when you work with people one-on-one, it's a lot more sort of obvious what they want to achieve. Because that was one of the things that for a while in my teaching, I found like teaching group classes like really challenging, because there's just so many different people. Like how is it possible to teach something that's going to be beneficial and useful for like, you know, in the yoga group, sometimes there's like 40 people in that room. Like what's actually going to be beneficial for all of these people? So now in my classes, I try to just teach something that's kind of like generally going to be like a nice thing for everybody to do. And then when I work with people like one-on-one, that's where I get a bit more specific on like, you know, okay, you want to improve you want to work on handstands. Okay, you're going to have to improve your shoulder mobility. And then it can be a bit more specific because I kind of know what they want to achieve. But in group classes, I sort of feel now, although I bring in like mobility stuff and all that kind of stuff, I more just like general nice things for everybody. Because I think that's kind of like a nicer experience than like me standing there and being like externally rotate.
You call that external rotation?
Because that's a bit, that's kind of like training. And that has its place, but sometimes its place isn't in like a 60-minute group open level Vinyasa class, I think.
Yeah, it's trying to incorporate the mobility stuff. Well, firstly, as you said, it's sometimes not that fun to do it. And it's also very challenging for your ego, because if you were to look at a video of someone doing mobility work, you'd be like, well, they're not lifting weights. They're not even like in a plank. They're just trying to sit down and lift their leg off the floor. It looks so easy. And then when you realize the restrictions you have, it takes a while to get into mobility work. But then when you put it into a class, when I put it into a class, you have to be very, I feel like conscious about where you put it in the sequence. Because if you start off just doing like real strict mobility stuff, people are in a different headspace. They're still, as you said, thinking about maybe, you know, the day at work or what they got to do later on. So how I try and structure it in, and actually this is to answer someone's question who asked me this yesterday about sequencing. They said the question was, where do you get your ideas for your classes and how do you sequence them, or something like that, right? Well, the first thing is I've never had an original idea in my life. That's the first thing. I look online or refer to my 300-hour teacher training, teachers like yourself, other people that I see, things they say, oh, I like that. And I just borrow from everyone, essentially. Second thing is I try to think about what I would like in the class. And I think every class, in my opinion, for me to be an effective yoga practice, has to start with breathing. Not breathing and movement, just some basic breathing. It can be real simple. And then some movement that isn't overly technical, that is accessible to most people and has some sort of rhythm. Doesn't have to be a sun salutation. I think then once you have people they're in their body, as you say, or maybe their adrenaline is up and they're out of that logical thinking phase, then you can start introducing concepts, more technical concepts. But that's the kind of basic. So for this class I did the other day, and I really went into the 90-90 thing, you know, the shin box, and I didn't do it till maybe 35, 40 minutes into the class, and that was fine but even when I was doing it, I was kind of rushing the way I was teaching it a little bit, just because I still am developing my confidence to teach something that's so new in yoga. How have you found then, if you're teaching, say, a new concept like that, doing it remotely or online compared to in real life?
I'm not really sure. I think definitely when I started doing online stuff, my classes got much more general. For again, kind of that reason, because you're just like, as we kind of talked about before, a lot of times when you're even teaching online, it's just like, it can be a lot of like blank screens. Even people have their cameras on, it's not even you can particularly see people what they're doing all that well.
Yeah.
So I think in that my classes got like a lot more general. But I sort of find with mobility stuff and kind of teaching those things, particularly when you're teaching it in sort of like a yoga setting, when you can sort of like very obviously show how it benefits a yoga thing, it becomes way more sort of like I think, well, me myself anyways, like I just got it a lot more, you know what I mean? Like you can talk about sort of like scapular control, like retracting, protracting your shoulders, and that can sound a bit kind of like dry. But then when you actually show it in like a pose, like upward facing dog, if you can retract your shoulders really well, you're going to get all of this like new space and new benefits. And then it's like, oh, okay, sorry, like that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think I did like a weekend with teacher training last weekend, and some of it was on sequencing and stuff like that, and peak pose sequencing. And I think you can sort of like even like use mobility stuff as almost like a peak pose sequencing sort of thing. And what I like about sequencing, or what I love when I go to people's classes that sequence really well, is this kind of like deconstruction and reconstruction sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like kind of like, because genuinely, in my experience at least, every single complicated thing is just loads of simple things added together. And the hard part of it is just adding all the pieces together. And so when people are able to like take apart all the pieces a lot like more, show little kind of like bite-sized chunks, and then explore like adding them all together, I think that's awesome. And that's what I like about sequencing and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's the interesting one, because my sister was around the other day we were chatting about this book called Your North Star, and the book talks about, it's kind of a book that incorporates, what do you want to call it, activities in it, where they get you to like write down stuff and plan stuff. And one of them is, what is a goal you have? Give yourself a timeline for it, and then work backwards from that. And I think that's a big challenge that people find in their structure in a class. Like, how am I going to start the class? Okay, what am I going to do after that? For the first thing to think of, as you said, deconstructing, is to think out, if it's a peak pose class, what is that pose? And then what would you need to do to get into that, starting with the biggest movements going down to the smallest. And then, as you said, reconstruct it into an actual class.
Yeah. I think, and definitely for me as well, like, just having a focus is so important. And again, on the training, something I try to like put across to people is like, what is it that you actually want to teach? You know, and it doesn't have to be this big sort of philosophical life-changing thing, but what is it that you actually want to share with people? And I think when you can find that, everything else will like fall into place a lot more easier. But when you're sort of like grabbing things and trying to fit them into something, it can be a little bit sort of confusing, and where do I start, or you know, all that kind of stuff. But when you have a focus, and when you sort of like know what it is that you want to share, I think all that sort of stuff becomes a lot easier. What do you
say if someone says to you, what are you trying to teach?
Yeah.
Like what's your,
I guess over the while,
what's your North Star, Brian?
What's my North Star? I think it shifts, and I think that's like a really nice thing. I think, you know, that as I sort of grow as a person, as an individual, where I sort of find meaning and what I find useful shifts as well. But I think in general, and particularly at the moment, it's like the breathwork stuff is like sort of like my main buzz. And even like sort of like physical classes that I teach are basically, in my head at least, is just like moving breathwork classes. And sort of at the moment at least, sort of like my big focus in my own practice and my own sort of life and in the stuff that I'm teaching is understanding sort of little like moment to moment tools for well-being, and just like moment to moment things that you can call upon at like any time to just make yourself, or just to find like a little bit of clarity, and just to like manage your situations a little bit better. I've been talking about it a lot. There's a guy called like Mark that I know, super cool guy. He's got a podcast as well.
In real life, as in real life, is he in Dublin?
Yeah, Mark Logan is his name. Truth Bangers is his podcast.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. You'd like talking to him. He's a cool dude.
Yeah.
But he came to one of my classes one morning in the space between. It was like 7 o'clock on a Monday morning, really early, and I'm not really like a morning person, so I was kind of like sleepy before those classes and stuff. And I met him in the changing room, and I was just like, "Oh, how's it going, mate? Like, how you doing?" And he's like, "Just doing my best to live in awareness."
Whoa!
Like kept walking. I was like, he's that kind of dude, you know what I mean? And
I don't know what his name down.
And he like, for him, I'm sure that was just his passing moment, but that's like really stuck with me ever since.
Doing my best to live in awareness. That's what he said.
Just doing my best to live in awareness. And I feel that's kind of that's kind of my buzz. That's what I'm trying to do now too, and that's what I'm trying to sort of like teach as well. You know what I mean? And to sort of teach within the context of a yoga practice is another thing that I kind of like to say quite often now, is that like this is a practice. It's not like a test. It's not a quiz. All you're doing is practicing. And I feel what we're doing, even within the physical stuff, is you're just practicing paying attention. Like paying attention to how you're moving physically, paying attention to how you're breathing, paying attention to being distracted, paying attention to being frustrated, paying attention to being like, I wish this teacher would like just shut the fuck up for a minute. You know what I mean? Just paying attention to all of those things. Because I've personally found that when you start to like pay attention to things a little bit more, it gives you a bit more like agency and a little bit more awareness. And with that comes a sense of like freedom. I find, at least. It's again when like Justin, when I do some one-on-one stuff with him as well. We haven't done it in a while because we can both be a little bit flaky sometimes. But we would have these like phone conversations, and he just like talk for ages, and I just listen, just like writing down notes. And one of the things that he said to me one time was that with agency comes freedom, or with accountability comes freedom. That when you actually are just completely accountable for what's happening to you in the moment, that gives you all this freedom, because it's like, okay, you know, one of the things that we worked on quite a lot is like narratives. So when you notice the stories that you're telling yourself of like, this is unfair, or this is like, this is this, or this is this. And a lot of times what you're usually saying to yourself is like, this is happening to me and I don't like it, or whatever. But what you try to do with like the narrative stuff that we work on is actually say like, no, be accountable. Like, I feel that this is happening to me. You know what I mean? I feel that this is unfair. It's not that this is or isn't unfair, but I feel that it's unfair. And when you take that accountability, okay, it's me that's feeling this, it gives you a little bit of freedom. Like, okay, well, you kind of analyze why you're feeling that way. Yeah, is it like rational, or is it reasonable, or is it like... And for me, at least, when you kind of start to kind of take that accountability, you just realize that you have a choice, and you can sort of choose to do things differently if you want to. And so that's one of the things that I tried. And for me, again, like it's awareness of my breathing has been one of like the greatest tools in helping with all that stuff. So that's definitely my focus.
How do you, that was brilliant, by the way. How do you define, and this is a word that's kind of, I've tried to grasp before. When you say agency, how would you define that?
Agency for me is sort of like...
I'm not looking for, like an Oxford dictionary definition, but to you.
Agency for me is like, is sort of, I guess, almost like a freedom to choose.
Yeah.
Or there's a word I think would sum this up very well, and I can't think of that word. It's kind of an empowerment, I would say, but a kind of a personal empowerment, and a kind of a feeling... Yeah, personal empowerment, I think, is maybe the best way to sort of put it. But not in this sort of very real, like, I am, like, amazing sort of thing. Yeah. But just like, I have a choice. I have options. And kind of embracing that, I think, is what it sort of speaks to me, at least. I could be very, very wrong.
No, that's because that word has escaped me many times when I've tried to use it in a sentence in talking about yoga, and what you said there about something that encourages you or maybe forces you to pay attention. Like, I was listening to Alan Watts every day, but lately, and he was talking about the different styles of yoga, and one of them, he talked about karma yoga and saying how, you know, it's the yoga of action. So it could be running, or windsurfing could be your yoga, your way of interacting with the world and paying attention to something, and doing something skillfully. And it's a bit like when I was setting up the cameras here, I said, you know, last time you were on here, it was just, it was a very low tech setup, but this is like my yoga. I love podcasting. I'm because I've realized since doing it in 2 years now, my blind spots. And I used to think I was like quite socially developed, because in a party situation, I would be quite loud, like the center of attention. And therefore I thought socially I'm pretty good, I'm pretty open-minded and this, that and the other. But I realize now, especially when you listen back to yourself, the way I'm quite self-righteous and self-absorbed as well, and I feel like I have. If I disagree with someone, I'm right, they're wrong, and I don't know where that comes from. It's the thing of like almost part of my motivation has been I can prove people wrong, that I can be self-sufficient and all this type of stuff. And maybe this is better off in a therapist office, but like the thing with being motivated is like what kind of fuels you can destroy you as well. Because I'm talking about me personally, if actually someone posted this today, might have been Yoga Hub, said like something like, don't desire more, but instead desire less, or something like that. But essentially it was okay, maybe that's not relevant to this point, but when you're motivated from the wrong place, you're never going to be happy. And I have decided now that I want to be way more conscious about the narratives in my head. As you said, Bri, instead of thinking I'm unhappy, you could say I feel unhappy, or I disagree, I feel a disagreement with this. And you can look at things more objectively then. And I really believe, especially, this is actually definitely a quote that goes like the other day, if you're not embarrassed by what you did last year, you're not growing. Alain Botton said that. And I'm regularly embarrassed. I look back at teacher trainings and I'll be like, oh, why did I say that? I'm so adamant in a point, and I'm like, this is the way it is. And then someone will question it. And at the time, because I feel like I'm in a leadership role, I don't give in to that. And then afterwards I'll say to Rach, like, I could have gave a bit more leeway there. And because I get so enthusiastic in a conversation that I'm like, yeah. Instead of taking a moment to pause and question. And I actually feel like that is a big blind spot for me, is not understanding, not paying attention to why I think and feel certain ways.
I think it came up with Justin as well when I was talking to him, is that we're all basically pattern forming creatures, and we get into habits, and that's really efficient. It's not like a bad thing at all. But I definitely think one of the things that Michael Stone talks about this a lot as well in like his teachings, how a yoga practice is to bring you into a more intimate relationship with reality. It's like what is actually happening outside of like the ideas you have in your head and like your perceptions of what should or shouldn't happen, and like other people's ideas and all this sort of stuff. And what Justin talked about is the idea of like the readiness to reject, when we're so quick to be like, no, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's not like, and that's what you're basically doing in that readiness to reject, is falling back into your patterns, because it's like, that's wrong, this is right. And again, it's not to say, like, I think when sometimes we talk about stuff like narrative and patterns, for me at least, when I was first learning about these things, is this automatic assumption that they're bad. Like narrative is bad because it sounds, again, like we're talking about with like branding, it sounds like manipulative and it sounds like constructed, which it definitely can be, but narrative is how we make sense of the world, and it's not like, but for me at least, it's the idea of being like aware of where all of these things come from. And now, because I definitely would have gone through that stage as well, like say for example on like Instagram, a teacher would put up something, well, that's fucking stupid, like that's just really quick, that's not what that is, that's not like, and realizing now that that's just me, like a protective, like slipping into sort of like old pattern kind of things. So now at least for me, again, with all these kind of like work that I've done with these teachers, it's just to be aware of it. And that's not to say that now I'm this kind of like scrolling through Instagram reading like, oh yes, that's amazing, everyone is so great, like I still get like, you know what I mean, but I kind of now a bit more aware of where that comes from. And yeah, that sort of idea of just being a little bit more intimately connected with what is actually happening in the moment. And I think that's a really nice thing. Yeah, I think it's good.
It's a strange line to tread though when you're in a teacher training environment, because hopefully you are the authority to some degree, or the person at the top is the authority, as in they can lead with a certain confidence, but to have the humility to say when they're wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually seen this guy on YouTube yesterday. He was debunking himself from 2 years before that. He was looking at a video of himself talking about, I forget what the topic was. It was about something about diet, veganism versus meat, and he's actually vegan. And then he was debunking certain things he was saying, and how there isn't enough of that really, because you don't want to feel like you don't want to feel, I suppose, exposed. You know.
Yeah, but like the teacher trainings is funny, because I feel like a lot of like the way I look at the teacher trainings is it's just one big like group project. You know what I mean? And I don't necessarily feel in like an authority position when I do them and stuff like that. And I definitely try to encourage nobody to kind of like look at it that way, because like I've done teacher trainings, but it's like, and I'm talking about anatomy, and it's like doctors, and there's like, you know, like people like, you know,
yeah,
kind
true.
of like
Physios
so, and are talking about like psychology, and there's like psychologists, and like, it's kind of, I'm coming up from the perspective of the things that I've learned, which is sort of like a yoga perspective. I don't even like that word so much anymore, but just this kind of like, I'm coming from a perspective, and there's different perspectives, and I think the more we can sort of bring them all in is amazing. And I can't remember who it was, but it's definitely, I think Adam Hustler talked about it to me once before, how like probably the best answer you can give to anything is it depends.
Yeah.
And that's, for me, it's just like so true.
Yeah.
And like, it's just that, and that's why I feel this idea of being like an authority and stuff like that on trainings. I mean, okay, obviously there's like someone who has to be like, okay, we're starting now we're going to go for lunch, now we're going to do this and stuff like that. There has to be that sort of authority. But for me, it's like the answer to most things is like, it depends.
Yeah.
And the more kind of perspectives that get brought into that, the better. Because again, on the teacher trainings, what I always say is that like, the world does not need more people to cue sun salutations. Like, there's enough of that. Like, we've got enough people like that. But the more people, for me, who are able to kind of gain stuff from the tools that are given to them in the courses, and then bring their own perspectives into it, that for me is amazing. Because that's, for me, when this like big group project that we're all kind of consciously or unconsciously working on is going to get better.
Yeah, I think you're more experienced in I don't think you are more experienced in teacher training than I am. And at the start of the teacher training, the first one I did, I was kind of overly strict, because and this is something I learned when I was in Korea. One of the teachers had advised me that when you're with, and obviously it's different, but when you're with the kids, you should be very stern at the start, and then eventually ease up on that, and then they will feel like they've kind of won you over a little bit, and they'll feel like you have a stern side to you instead of it being a surprise when you need it. Yeah. The difference there, well, culturally it's different for a start. Also the language barrier, it's difficult to reason when you don't speak the same language. And also they're children.
I would love to see you teaching a lot of little Korean kids.
Oh yeah, it was great sometimes, but other times it was very challenging. You forget how much you rely on language to reason with people. You know,
yeah, I think so.
They were lovely.
Did you learn any Korean?
No, very basic amount. I couldn't have a conversation, enough to get about. But does that work in other environment? It depends.
Well, I do think definitely a part of a yoga practice is discipline. And there's no like, and discipline is a really good thing to practice. So one thing that I do say in the trainings that we do and stuff like that is stuff like timing. Okay, anybody can miss the bus, and like, or there can be bad traffic and stuff like that, but like, be on time as much as you can be on time. Like, don't be faffing around like, oh, it's okay if I'm 5 minutes late. Like, that's a really bad pattern to get into. So on the trains, I say, like, we're starting on time.
Yeah.
If you're late, we're not going to wait for people if they're late. And for me, it's kind of like a respect thing, but not respecting like the teacher as this like authority figure, but a respect of like the process that we're trying to go through. Again, like, look, you can be, you know, buses can be late and stuff like that. There's no like, being late isn't the worst thing in the world, but to get a little bit of that discipline, I think is good. And so in some sense, I think there's definitely is a role for people leading the courses to instill that discipline. But yeah, for the most part.
But honestly, and I said this to the guys, the teacher trainees, now that they finished, I said, look, we kind of did a review of the year, and I said the first weekend I was so nervous that when you're nervous, it's actually quite difficult to be nice. It's a lot easier to be quite strict. It's like you go on a date and you're nervous and you're not yourself. You say if you're normally funny and charming, but you're not, because you're just like, oh God, I'm so nervous. I'm trying to hide that. So that was a part of it as well, because I was I prepared so much that I was worried I was going to forget what I had to say. And it became quite kind of, right, tick boxes. And that came across as being a little bit stern. And I said, yeah, so I've learned from that now, that, and also what would I want when I did my 300 hour with Dicey Decline? Like, I'm a big fan of Dice's, and I remember he was so relaxed, and so is Brian as well, but he was so relaxed. But I wouldn't want to be late because I liked him as a person and respected him. And he would never, if you were late, he would never say like, don't be late. You just see on his face, he'd be like, oh, and so my motivation on that teacher training as a student was different, because I liked and respected the person, because they never actually acted with that kind of authority as a disciplinarian, because, people are adults, and as you said, there's doctors, there's
yeah. And I feel like it's not, especially with like the trains and stuff like that, like okay, with the studios and stuff, there's like advertising and marketing, all that sort of stuff, but it's saying like, I haven't asked anybody to be here, you know what I mean? Like, you've chosen to be here. And how you choose to make use of that time, it's completely up to you. Like, I'm not gonna like grab anyone by the ear and like, you're not paying attention, you need to like, you've chosen to be here. I will do my very best to share what I know as best that I can. Completely up to you, how you want to kind of like deal with that yourself. So that's why I don't really feel the need to be like particularly strict with people. Not that I'd want to be anyways, except for with timing. I think timing is a good thing to be strict on. Yeah,
I think so. Someone said to me once, when you're late for something, it means you value your time more than the other person's.
Well, again, like being late, like
it happens now and again. Now and again, but I'm saying consistently, it's but it's a real challenging one sometimes when you. That's another thing. A bit of personal development for me is to make a message, make a point, but to not let it bring the atmosphere of the room down, and to also be careful as to when you do make points. The timing is so important as well, because it's a hypersensitive environment.
I think there can be, because I've definitely noticed sometimes on the trainings, myself and stuff, that you can sort of make a point from a place of like, you genuinely think this is an important thing for people to take on board, or sometimes you can make a point from a place of being like, kind of like feeling like you need to be the authority figure, or if you get a little bit like offended or hurt or taken aback by something. And I think when your points come from that place, they usually come across as being a little bit like unnecessary. But I think you can make a point from a place that's like, genuinely looking out for people's best interests, even if that point is a bit like
I feel for me at the start, I might have swayed towards taking things personally because I was basically insecure. If you haven't done anything, if you're doing something that you've never done before, you have no measuring stick as to if you're doing it well or not. You don't know. Now I can look back and say, okay, I can, hindsight's 2020, and I can look objectively at the last year and think about what I liked or didn't like, and also the feedback that I got from the people, which has been good, thankfully. So, but yeah, I've learned a ton. I'm going to switch gears slightly, Bri. I want to ask you, just because I was listening to a video about this the other day about CBD, all right, and I'm not sleeping very well at the moment, right? Would you say a CBD taker or enthusiast?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know if I call myself an enthusiast, but like things that come from that plant, I'm a fan of.
Okay. Firstly, how do you ingest it?
I take drops, but I've started recently taking like these gummy things, which are delicious. But normally it's just like drops. Yeah.
Okay. And why?
I for a similar reason when I first started taking CBD was I've never been a great sleeper. As long as I can remember, I've always kind of like, not always struggled with sleep, but sleep is definitely a bit of something that I would like to improve, basically.
Yeah.
And I've tried loads of different ways, all the different teas and tablets and all these sort of things. And so CBD was one of the things that I tried during that sort of journey of trying to sleep better. And I wouldn't say to anybody that CBD is this automatic, like, you can take it and have like a perfect night's sleep or anything. But I have definitely found that it can help me sort of unwind a little bit. It's also supposed to have these amazing like anti-inflammatory like qualities and stuff like that. So I've never had any negative effects from taking it. I tend to take it.
You've noticed the difference in your sleep then?
Sometimes it's, for me at least, in my own I don't know if I have the word journey, but my journey with sleep, let's say, is that if you're not sleeping well, more than likely taking something is not going to automatically improve it over the long term. I would say that if you're not sleeping well, there's probably a whole host of factors playing into that, like what's going on like mentally, what are your routines during the day, what are you eating, all that sort of stuff. So like I said, I wouldn't say that you're going to take CBD and you're automatically going to start sleeping better. But as I say, it's something that I have found, if I take it sometimes in the evening, or at a time when I'm feeling a little bit kind of like highly strung and stuff like that, it can help. But combined with lots of other things.
Yeah. Biologically, I think people vary so much as well. Like, we have cannabinoid receptors in our brains, but at the same time, I know cannabis, as in with THC in it, is different because it has a psychoactive agent in it. But if you have, say, one person could smoke weed and be great, or one person could drink alcohol and be great, another person could do it and they go off the rails, or they just react differently. So I wonder, because CBD is not cheap. It really, like, I don't. Well, it depends how much value you put on whatever the end product is, but and I've been thinking to myself, like, I experimented with it before because I eat well. I don't really have any stress. I exercise every day. I'm always moving, and life is good. I don't really have any worries. Everyone around me is healthy. But at the same time, occasionally now I'll wake up at, say, 6, 7, fine. But generally it's 4 a.m. I wake up, boom, and I'm just like ready to go. And I said before that it used to be that it's because I'm excited for my day, which I am, but I am. I do enjoy my life, but at the same time, I think 5 hours sleep is not sufficient. And everyone, now again, biologically speaking, everyone needs different amounts of sleep. But I just, to get up that early feels, I make the best of it. I'm looking for things maybe that I haven't considered.
Do you nap?
I try to, but the dog. The dog, man. I mean, the dog who Brian met this morning barks so much, and I love the dog. But if you were to say to me, right, Kev, the next 8 months, this is what your life is going to be like with a dog, I'd say I don't want a dog. Seriously, and I'm not proud to say that, but I love him now because I'm emotionally attached to him. I wonder if they say the same thing about having a kid. Well, I've got him now, so I might as well. And this is actually a slightly different topic, but I read this article in the paper, and it was people writing in saying that who regretted having children. It was just really weird. Now, they didn't put their full name, it was just their first name. But it was people giving their explanation of why they wish they never had kids. And it's something you would never hear someone say, you know, because it's not socially acceptable to be like, well, I love my kid, but I also...
It's a mistake.
It's a mistake. But yeah, so in regards to napping, I know that when we have, because we're due to have a baby in September, that napping might go out the window, but supposedly you don't like... All I'm saying is I would like to sleep in a little bit longer than 4 a.m., which I think is pretty reasonable.
Well, the reason why I asked about the napping thing was that I used to nap on certain days, depending on my schedule. Sometimes I'd be like working late the night before, then up early that day, and then I'd nap during the day. And I actually found the days that I napped the following night, even if I was exhausted going to bed, I wouldn't sleep as well.
If you napped, you wouldn't sleep as well?
Yeah. That is kind of like my body would almost feel like, oh, I've got that bit of sleep in. Like, I don't know. I'm no expert on it. But like I said, I definitely, in my own experience, like there's just a lot of factors go into play if you're not sleeping well.
Yeah.
And it's not an enjoyable thing to not sleep well.
No. And I mean, I do a lot of breathing techniques, and that helps me get to sleep.
Yeah.
Do the 4 7 8. Yeah, I do that, and that helps me get to sleep. But it's supposedly what wakes you up is adrenaline. Your adrenal glands stimulated by adrenaline, and that's what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Do you dream much?
I can't tell you the last dream I had. No, do you?
And I think it was actually a common thing during lockdown. My dreams started getting a lot more vivid.
Right.
Yeah. And I heard that was a really common thing that happened. I don't know the explanation. I don't know exactly why, but yeah, definitely over the last few months, my dreams got a lot more vivid.
That actually brings me nicely to a question someone had on Instagram about you and lockdown, because obviously you were traveling quite a lot, you know, and you're a bit of a free bird, I would say. You know, you
during lockdown or before.
How you found lockdown essentially?
No, I wouldn't necessarily. I got very lucky in the sense I did do 2 really nice big trips just before lockdown. I wouldn't necessarily. Before that, I was like a big traveler or anything like that. Oh, I've done kind of okay, but my probably similar to you in a lot of ways. Like I had probably 2 years. The 2 years previous to this year were probably just like insanely busy. Teaching too much, I would say, taking on too much, not sleeping as much, and I found that by the end of last year, I was like pretty burnt out. And it's just a weird thing to be like busy as a yoga teacher. I feel now that's like should almost be like an oxymoron.
Yeah.
If you are truly practicing, you shouldn't let yourself get that busy. So definitely my intention now that things kind of like start to open up again is to not get that busy again. But I also feel at some level you have to kind of get really busy to find out what you're sort of like, you know what I mean? You're going to have to like get up and then...
Yeah.
It's nice to have this visual so you can just kind of like do things, don't worry if there's any sort of like... just do... You know
Brian has one hand up, one hand down.
Yeah, just sort of... but... So I took like 6 weeks to go to Australia at the start of the year to like see some friends over there. I used to live there, see some friends, do some traveling, and basically just to not teach or not be in that role for like 6 weeks, which is super nice. And then we got back and then did a retreat in Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, when all of this kind of stuff started to like kick off, I think the day we got back from Sri Lanka was the day they closed the schools. I taught like 2 classes the next day, and then like studios closed and stuff like that. So it really was kind of like it was a mad start to the year. Like I kind of started to forget what normal was like because I was just traveling loads, and then like lockdown, and like it was. So I feel like I kind of got a lot of like traveling out of my system before like lockdown started. But how I personally found lockdown was like, I'm so lucky to be able to say it, but I loved it. I had an awesome time. I had a really nice time. Just that slower pace of life was really like nourishing for me, like truly. I found I had just like less, not sure, I felt like I was able to let go of a lot of sort of like ideas that I had before of what I should be doing or what you know what I mean? I don't not to name check him in like in a negative way, because he's the most amazing dude, such a great guy and such an amazing teacher. But I definitely think at one stage in my career, I wanted to be like Adam Hustler.
I knew you were going to say that.
He teaches everywhere, does retreats, classes are amazing, and like the dude, he's so nice and he's got so much energy. And I thought like that's what a yoga teacher is. You know what I mean? Like that in my head, that's what a yoga teacher was, or like a modern yoga teacher, let's say. And I don't think I was actively striving to be like that, but I think subconsciously I kind of had that in my head. And even though I was exhausted, I sort of wore busyness as like a badge of pride. You know what I mean? I somehow felt that busyness was equated to value.
Yeah, I agree.
Know what I mean? And lockdown helped me let go of that. That you could teach 2 classes a week and be to some people that the exact teacher that people need, rather than feeling like, oh, if you're not teaching every day, or you're not doing workshops, you're not doing trainings, you're not doing retreats, that somehow is some kind of, you know what I mean?
I fall into that trap too, mate. Yeah. No, I was like, exact same thing. And then I was saying to someone recently about how I felt like a hypocrite in the last couple of weeks, because you're teaching yoga, you're talking about balance and knowing when to slow down. I'm not doing any of that. So that's why I cut my classes down to like, I'm doing like 3-4 week now, I think 4 week. Yeah. And other things as well. Like I bought this tablet thing in this book that teaches you how to draw, to learn how to draw and to be more creative, essentially. Then just even the word busy means nothing. To be busy doesn't mean anything. Productive, that's a different. If you're busy, I mean, anyone could really be busy. I think initially what drove me to be busy was that not being able to get a job at the start of. I was like, oh, I've made a massive mistake here. No one's going to hire me. I'm just going to go back to doing what I, was doing before. And then that kind of it doesn't go away until you actually realize, all right, now I'm just being busy for the sake of it, and I feel like it's a status thing. And funnily enough, Adam Husler and Dice Eda Klein, 2 teachers I admire. They're for me the upper echelon, the quality, everything, right? But they couldn't be more opposite in busyness. As in, Dice works definitely, but you rarely post on Instagram. He'll do, I don't think he does public classes anymore at all, hasn't done for a while, and does the occasional training, but they're going to sell out, and so actually this is something hopefully that other people who are teaching yoga or think about it, even if you've been doing it for a while, to realize that you can be effective without having to be busy.
It's really interesting actually. There's an amazing, I don't know how you describe him really, like a physical philosopher, I guess. A guy called Stanley Kellerman, and I read one of his books recently, and in it he was talking about this self-definitions, that when we start to define ourselves as something, like saying I'm busy, because that's what I know. Sort of like for like the last 2 years, anyone asked me how I was, oh, I'm busy. And he was like, it's not that that's wrong, you know what I mean? But that when you start to create these self-definitions, what you're basically doing is you're blocking off other potential opportunities. So for example, like when I had this thing in my head of like being busy, and like a friend would be like, oh, do you want to like go for dinner? I'm like, I'm busy. I'm supposed to have time to go for dinner with somebody. I am busy. You know what I mean? And I definitely had time to go for dinner with people. I definitely had more time to spend with like my partner at the time. I definitely had more time to spend with like my family. But I had this definition of myself that I'm busy, and it made everything else seem like, even if I wasn't as aware of it, made everything else seem more like a nuisance. You know what I mean? Because I am busy, and I started to realize how like limiting that was. Even though in some sense I was sort of achieving what I thought I should achieve, of like teaching 20 classes a week and doing workshops and doing trainings, doing retreats, but it was so limiting in one sense, like so limiting. And to be fair to Adam, he says that himself. He said, this is not for everybody. You have to find what works for you and your own personality type.
Exactly.
What you want to achieve, your energy levels, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I just found that what I was trying to do, or what I was doing, was really limiting. That's the best way I could describe it. And I think we do that with loads of things. Like we can do it like, you know, I'm sad, or I'm social, or I'm whatever it could be. I think it's not that those things are wrong, but when you're attaching those definitions to yourself, you're just closing off other opportunities. And so I was able to kind of work with that a little bit before lockdown, but definitely lockdown kind of helped me connect to that stuff. Easy example, during lockdown I started cooking loads because I had time to cook loads. And what I realised when I was cooking loads is that cooking doesn't take that much time. You can cook yourself a great meal in half an hour. But when I was really busy, it was like I would get a burrito on the way home because I'm too busy to cook. I don't have time to cook. Again, it was just an idea. It was just an idea that I had in my head. So lockdown for me, so lucky to be able to say it. You know what I mean? That like I didn't know anyone personally affected. My family was safe. No one that I know, you know, lost their job. Like I was very, very lucky. And I'm fully aware that wasn't the case for a lot of people. But for me, it was awesome. Yeah, I was very, very fortunate to be able to say so. But I loved it. And I listened to Louis Theroux. Have you listened to Louis Theroux's podcast?
Yes, yeah, Grounded.
I don't really listen to podcasts that much, but I started listening to a little bit of his. One of the first ones he did with the Welsh dude that doesn't sound Welsh.
Yeah, yes. But they talked about lockdown. Oh God, what's his name?
He's a really interesting fella.
Yeah, he's really interesting.
But that's what your man was saying. He was like, it's going to be interesting going forward during this, the amount of people who are going to actually realise, actually, I kind of prefer things this way.
Yeah.
Like I kind of,
and also to realise that is actually that's actually my favourite episode. He does one with Boy George as well, which is also great in that episode, but the Grounded podcast. To realise as well how much do you need, like in Stoicism, to say like, if it went away, if I didn't have my accessories, would I be all right? And that gives you a lot of freedom. You know, it's to not, because otherwise, as you said, you have to teach to what suits your personality. But I know for me, for certain, like I've just gone back to start playing football now, just gone back to it, and I realise I've learned so much in the last 2 weeks that I wasn't getting on the yoga mat.
Step overs must be off the chart for hip mobility.
Just dropping shoulders everywhere. But yeah, I've and that's funny because you think like, could football be your yoga practice? I mean, Brian, actually, I haven't said. I've got to tell you this, and what I can, and because you play football, you definitely play football before.
Yeah.
Maybe you can relate to this, or maybe you can't. Maybe I'm just a bad person. But so psychologically speaking, skill level, I'm one of the lowest on the team. They're over 35s, but they're pretty good. Or maybe I'm just very bad. And so I'm probably the worst player there. Maybe. Anyway, so that's the first thing. So I'm like, right, I don't feel very confident in this environment because I'm not competent. That's the first thing. Secondly, I'm not physically as capable as I would be on a yoga mat. I know that that's not what it's about necessarily, but so I feel inferior, right? And then on my first training session back, someone kind of bollocked me. Bollocks means like when they tell you off or they scold you. It was like, fuck's sake, man, you know.
Scold.
Yeah, scold. It was like, fuck's sake, don't give away the ball or something like that. Yeah, I did some, and there's a couple of times I did it. I gave away the ball needlessly, trying to like do flicks and stuff. And when he scolded me, he's on my team. I should have psychologically said, he's right. I was messing around. I got to play it more simple and just do what I would like my teammate to do. But instead of thinking that, what I thought was, I hope the next time he gets the ball, he loses it. Which is terrible, isn't it? I was looking at my own teammate every time I get the ball and he maybe do it. And he was really good. So, but I was thinking, I hope he makes a bad touch now so I don't feel as bad. Yeah. And I just thought to myself, I went home thinking, you're a shitty person, Kev. Yeah, or maybe not a shitty person, but no, let's rephrase that. As you were saying earlier, that's I feel shitty. Well, that's a shitty. In that moment, in that moment, I felt something shitty, which is just interesting to realise that I had the capacity. I didn't think I would be that. What's the word? Like vindictive in my thoughts, and But if I didn't stop teaching these classes, I would never start going to football. Like, I'm too busy for football. I'm too busy for jiu-jitsu, for climbing, whatever. But to put yourself in environments where now I have a bit more the self-awareness to question myself, whereas before I would have gone, I'm right, he's wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think
confessions.
I used to be, when I played football, I was okay, but I was a dickhead. Like, I was horrible playing football. Like just shouting at teammates, shouting at the ref, shouting at coaches, like a proper little dictator. Like, but yeah. So it'd be interesting to, like, I would love to go back. I'm just working with a few little injuries and stuff that I'd be kind of like nervous going back to play football, but I'd be interested to see how I'd be now, because I wonder if it would bring it all back out of me again. But
What age are you?
31.
Okay, you got a while to go. 35, over 35.
But one of the words that gets most commonly associated with yoga is flexibility, and people, associate that with like a physical thing. But for me now, my understanding of flexibility now is just being able to like do different things. For me, like, if you said someone was flexible outside of a yoga, what's the word I'm looking for? Context, to just be like, they're able to do different things, basically. And that's actually what I feel that a practice can give you, that flexibility, in the sense of, like, it's all well and good being calm when you're in Shavasana at the end of a yoga class. What's the point of that, though, if you go out into a football pitch and you're a dickhead? You know what I mean? Like, or if you go into work and you're a dickhead. That flexibility is actually being able to apply the kind of skills of mindfulness and the skills of awareness to, like, every situation that you're in. And that's, there's, Michael Stone said, I'm not sure if I fully agree with it, but like Michael Stone has this saying where he says, anything can be meditative, but that doesn't mean it's meditation. So you can say playing football is some people will say like, oh, football is my meditation, or listening to Beyonce and like cleaning the house, that's my meditation. And he says that can be meditative, but it's not actually meditation. But I don't know if I fully agree with that. I don't know if I don't think there's necessarily a direct substitute for a meditation practice, like a practice of actually just sitting and paying attention. But I feel when you learn those skills of paying attention, you can apply that into every single scenario that you're in. And that for me is flexibility. Like that's being flexible. And that's a good thing to develop, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, that was great. Any closing words or thoughts?
No, I've nothing to sell. I've nothing to promote. nothing to hog.
Fair enough.
But always thank you for having me, Kev. I like talking to you.
Thank you for coming.
It was nice.
Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed that last hour of conversation. If you did, please share it with a friend. Maybe comment, leave a review, or even subscribe, and you get weekly updates on new episodes. This episode and podcast has been brought to you by Yoga at Home with me. If you'd like to do yoga from the comfort of your own home or wherever you have an internet connection, simply go on to kevinboyyoga.ie. 1 week free trial for constantly updated content. So every week I'm adding audio meditations using this fancy microphone and 60-minute classes. There's 35, 40 there now, and you constantly have access to the ever-growing archive. Visit Kevin Boy Yoga. Any questions, any comments, let me know. Hope you have a great week, and I'll catch up with you next week.